He thought cornering her in an empty parking lot would be easy, the kind of moment no one would question, no one would remember, but he had no idea that in a matter of seconds, everything he believed about power was about to unravel in complete silence. Rachel Monroe stepped out of the small neighborhood grocery store just past 9 p.m., a single paper bag resting lightly against her hip, her movements unhurried, almost invisible under the soft yellow glow of the overhead lights the air carried. That quiet stillness of late evening in a suburban American town, where distant traffic hummed like a fading echo and the scent of asphalt still held the warmth of the day. She walked across the lot in worn sneakers, her simple gray hoodie slightly oversized, her presence the kind most people would overlook without a second thought, the kind of woman people assumed lived a small, uneventful life, the kind of woman certain people believed they could control. A black pickup truck idled near the far corner, its headlights off, its silhouette blending into the shadows. Three figures leaned casually against it, their laughter low, sharp, carrying just enough edge to disrupt the calm. Rachel noticed them the same way she noticed everything else, without turning her head, without changing her pace. Her eyes remained steady, her posture relaxed, but something deeper registered, something quiet and precise like a clock ticking beneath the surface. As she approached her car, parked beneath a flickering light that buzzed faintly overhead, the laughter behind her stopped abruptly. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was intentional. One set of footsteps broke away, then another, slow, deliberate, closing the distance. "Hey," a voice called out, casual but heavy with assumption. "You got a minute?" Rachel paused, her hand resting lightly on her car door, not startled, not rushed, just still. The footsteps came closer, gravel shifting under weight, the faint creak of denim, the presence of someone who believed proximity alone was power. She turned slightly, just enough for her face to catch the light, her expression neutral, almost gentle. "I'm just heading home," she said quietly, her voice even, unshaken. The man stepped closer anyway, a half-smile forming like a performance he'd done too many times before, confident in its outcome. "Won't take long," he replied, his tone dipping lower, testing, pushing. The other two lingered behind him, not speaking, but watching, forming that invisible boundary that turned open space into something smaller, tighter. The world around them seemed to pull back, the distant sounds fading, the night holding its breath. Rachel's fingers loosened from the car door as she shifted her weight slightly, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting, as if aligning herself with something unseen. Her gaze met his for the first time, steady, unreadable. There was no fear there, none of the hesitation he expected, none of the quiet compliance he had already written into his version of the night. And for the briefest moment, something unfamiliar flickered across his face, something he couldn't quite name but quickly dismissed as nothing more than nerves. "Relax," he added with a short laugh, gesturing back toward the truck. "We're just talking." But the air had already changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the shift before a storm no one sees coming. Rachel didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, calm, composed, her presence no longer blending into the background but anchoring the moment itself. And somewhere in that quiet, something had already begun to turn. The man's smile lingered a second too long, the kind that assumed the outcome had already been decided, as if the night itself belonged to him and Rachel Monroe was simply passing through it without permission. He took another step forward, closing the space between them until the faint scent of engine oil and cologne hung in the air, heavy and deliberate behind him. The other two shifted subtly, their boots scraping against the pavement in a slow rhythm that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet lot. Rachel noticed everything, the angle of their shoulders, the way their eyes flicked between her and each other, the casual confidence that came from believing they were in control. She did not step back. Instead, she adjusted the grip on her grocery bag, setting it gently on the hood of her car with a care that felt almost out of place in the tension building around her. The small action drew a brief glance from the man in front of her, a flicker of confusion crossing his face as if he expected panic, or at least hesitation, but found neither. "You live around here?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly, probing now, trying to reassert the script he had written in his mind. Rachel tilted her head just a fraction, her expression unchanged. "Long enough," she replied, her voice calm, measured, the kind of tone that did not invite further questions but did not resist them either. The man chuckled under his breath, glancing back at his friends as if to confirm that everything was still under control. "That is good," he said, stepping just a little closer, "because we like to know who is in our neighborhood." The words carried a subtle weight, not loud, not aggressive, but clear enough in their meaning. The two behind him spread out slightly, not rushing, not overtly threatening, just enough to reshape the space into something narrower, something that belonged to them. The overhead light flickered again, casting brief shadows that stretched and disappeared like passing thoughts. Rachel's eyes moved once, slowly, taking in the distance between each of them, the position of the truck, the open path beyond it. Her breathing remained steady, almost invisible, as if the moment did not belong to fear at all. I am just heading home, she repeated, her tone unchanged, her gaze steady on the man in front of her. For a second, the silence pressed in tighter, the kind that made even the smallest movement feel amplified. The man's smile thinned, not gone, but sharper now, less playful and more insistent. He reached out slightly, not quite touching, but close enough to suggest that the boundary between them no longer mattered. No rush, he said, his voice lower, testing again, pushing just a little further than before. That was when something shifted, not in the air, not in the sound, but in Rachel herself. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a switch flipping behind her eyes. The softness in her posture did not disappear, but it settled into something more grounded, more deliberate. The quiet woman who had walked across the parking lot moments ago was still there, but now she stood with a presence that did not bend, did not yield. The man hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, as if something about her no longer matched the story he had been telling himself. He glanced back at his friends again, searching for reassurance, but even they had grown quieter, their movements less certain, their confidence no longer as effortless as before. Rachel did not raise her voice, did not step forward, did not step back. She simply looked at him, steady and composed, her silence speaking in a way words never could. And in that silence, the balance of the moment began to shift, slowly but unmistakably, like the ground beneath them was no longer as solid as it seemed. The hesitation did not last long, but it was enough, just enough to crack the illusion he had built around himself. The man straightened slightly, as if correcting something invisible, his jaw tightening before he forced another smile back into place, though this time it did not quite reach his eyes. You are pretty calm, he said, studying Rachel more carefully now, no longer dismissing her as easily as before. Most people would be a little more nervous. The word lingered in the air, stretched thin between expectation and reality. Rachel did not respond immediately. She let the silence settle again, not as a shield, but as something heavier. Something that made every second feel longer than it should have. The faint buzz of the overhead light returned, flickering in uneven pulses that cast brief shadows across their faces. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed on the main road, its headlights sweeping across the far edge of the lot before disappearing again, leaving them in that same contained pocket of quiet. Rachel finally spoke, her voice still even, still soft, but carrying a clarity that cut through the tension. People are not always what they seem, she said, her words simple, almost casual, yet they landed with a weight that none of them could quite ignore. One of the men behind the first shifted his stance, crossing his arms as if to mask the unease creeping in. What is that supposed to mean? He muttered, his tone less confident than before. The first man lifted his hand slightly, signaling him to stay quiet, his attention fixed entirely on Rachel now, trying to read something that refused to reveal itself. It means, Rachel continued, her gaze steady, you should not assume you understand a situation just because it looks familiar. Her words were not loud, not confrontational, but they disrupted the rhythm he had been relying on, the predictable pattern of fear and control that usually guided moments like this. He let out a short breath, somewhere between a laugh and a scoff, though it carried less conviction than before. You think you are different? He asked, tilting his head slightly, his tone probing again, searching for ground he could stand on. Rachel did not answer directly. Instead, she shifted her weight just a fraction, her stance adjusting in a way that seemed natural, almost unnoticeable, yet it changed something fundamental about how she occupied the space. The man noticed it, even if he could not explain why. His eyes flicked downward for a moment, catching the subtle repositioning of her feet, the balance in her posture, the quiet readiness that had not been there before, or perhaps had always been there, simply unseen behind him. The other two exchanged a quick glance, the kind that passed silently but carried meaning. Their earlier confidence had thinned, replaced by something less certain, something they had not planned for. Look, the man said, his voice tightening slightly as he tried to regain control of the moment, we are just having a conversation here. There is no need to make this complicated. Rachel's expression softened just enough to seem almost sympathetic, though her eyes remained steady. Then let it stay simple, she replied, her tone calm, unwavering. I leave, and you stay here. The directness of her words hung in the air, unexpected in its simplicity for a Brief moment, no one moved. The man's smile disappeared entirely now, replaced by a look that was harder to define, part frustration, part uncertainty. He took a small step closer, closing what little space remained between them, as if proximity alone could restore the balance he was losing. "And what if we are not done talking?" he asked quietly. That was when the shift became undeniable. Rachel did not step back, she did not raise her voice, she simply met his gaze, unblinking, her presence steady in a way that felt immovable. The night seemed to pause around them, the faint sounds of the world outside fading into nothing. The space between them no longer belonged to him, or to his assumptions, or to the story he thought he was writing. It belonged to her, and for the first time, he felt it slipping completely out of his control. The question lingered between them, quiet but heavy, as if the night itself was waiting for an answer that would decide everything. Rachel Monroe did not rush to respond, did not fill the silence the way most people would have. Instead, she let it stretch, let it settle into something uncomfortable, something that made the man in front of her shift his weight without realizing why. His confidence had always depended on reaction, on fear, on the predictable ways people folded under pressure, but Rachel offered him none of that. She simply stood there, her gaze steady, her posture relaxed yet grounded in a way that felt deliberate, controlled. "Then you should finish it quickly," she said at last, her voice calm, almost quiet, but carrying a firmness that cut through the moment like a line drawn in place. The man's expression tightened again, frustration flickering beneath the surface as the situation refused to follow the path he expected. He glanced briefly to his left, then to his right, checking the presence of his friends as if drawing strength from their proximity. But even they had grown still, their earlier smirks fading into something more uncertain. The overhead light buzzed again, flickering just long enough to cast shadows across their faces, turning familiar expressions into something less certain, less defined. One of the men behind him cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have. "Maybe we should just go," he muttered under his breath, though not quite quietly enough. The first man did not respond immediately, his focus still locked on Rachel, as if stepping away now would mean admitting something he was not ready to face. "No," he said finally, his voice lower now, more controlled but lacking the ease it once carried. "We are not done here." He stepped forward again, this time just enough to test the boundary once more, his presence pressing into the space between them as if trying to reclaim it. Rachel did not move, she did not retreat, did not flinch, did not even shift her stance in response. Instead, something subtle changed in the way she held herself, something that was not visible at first glance but undeniable once felt. Her balance settled more deeply, her shoulders aligned with quiet precision, her breathing steady and measured as if each moment had already been accounted for. The man noticed it again, that same unexplainable detail that made his instincts hesitate even as his mind pushed forward. He extended his hand slightly, not touching, but close enough to suggest that he could, that he might. The space between them felt smaller now, tighter, charged with something neither of them spoke aloud. "You really think you can just walk away?" he asked, his voice softer but edged with something sharper beneath it. Rachel's eyes did not leave his. She did not blink, did not look away, did not acknowledge the tension the way he expected her to. Instead, she answered with the same calm certainty she had carried from the beginning. "Yes," she said simply. The word landed without force, without volume, yet it carried a weight that seemed to shift the entire moment. For a brief second, everything paused. The distant hum of the road, the flicker of the light, even the faint movement of air seemed to still, as if the night itself had drawn a line. The man's hand remained where it was, hovering in that uncertain space, no longer as confident in its purpose as it had been just moments before. Behind him, his friends exchanged another glance, this one longer, more deliberate, their earlier certainty now replaced by something closer to doubt. Rachel remained exactly where she was, unmoved, unshaken, her presence no longer something to overlook but something to reckon with. And in that quiet, the balance shifted completely, not through force, not through confrontation, but through something far more unsettling to those who relied on control. The realization that the person standing in front of them was not the person they thought she was, and never had been. The silence after her answer did not break, it deepened, settling into the space like something neither side could ignore. The man's hand, still hovering in that uncertain distance between them, no longer carried the same confidence it had moments ago. It lingered there, suspended, as if waiting for permission that was never going to come. Rachel Monroe did not move, did not acknowledge the tension directly, but something about her presence made the air feel heavier, more deliberate, as though every second was now being measured against a standard none of them understood. The faint hum of the overhead light returned, steady this time, illuminating the scene with a clarity that left nowhere for uncertainty to hide. The man slowly lowered his hand. Not in defeat, not yet, but in hesitation, a subtle shift that spoke louder than anything he could say. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he searched her face for something, anything, that would restore the balance he believed he had lost. "You are making this a bigger deal than it needs to be," he said finally, though his voice lacked the certainty it once held. As if he was trying to convince himself more than her. Rachel's expression softened just slightly, not in submission, but in understanding, as though she had seen this moment before, many times, in different places, with different faces. "No," she replied calmly, her voice steady, unwavering, "you already made it that way." The words settled into the space with quiet precision, leaving no room for interpretation behind him. One of the others shifted again, this time stepping back half a pace. The movement small but unmistakable. It was the first sign that something fundamental had changed, that the invisible structure they had relied on was beginning to fracture. The man noticed it, even if he did not turn to look, even if he refused to acknowledge it outright. His shoulders squared again, an attempt to reclaim something slipping through his grasp, but the effort felt forced now, less natural than before. "You think standing there like that changes anything?" he asked, his tone sharper, edged with frustration. Rachel's gaze remained fixed on him, calm, unshaken, her presence anchored in a way that did not require effort. "It already has," she said simply. The statement did not rise, did not challenge, but it carried a certainty that pressed against him in ways he could not explain. For a moment, no one spoke. The night held its breath again, the distant world beyond the parking lot fading into something distant and irrelevant. The truck behind them, once a symbol of their control over the space, now felt like nothing more than a shadow against the edge of the lot. Rachel shifted her weight slightly, not retreating, not advancing, but preparing in a way so subtle it could easily be missed, except it was not missed. The man saw it again. That same adjustment, that same quiet readiness that did not match the image he had formed of her from the start. His instincts, buried beneath layers of assumption and pride, stirred with something unfamiliar, something that whispered caution where there had once been certainty. "You should go," Rachel said, her tone still even, but now carrying a finality that had not been there before. It was not a request, it was not a suggestion, it was a boundary, clearly drawn, impossible to misunderstand. The man exhaled slowly, the tension in his posture shifting as if he stood at the edge of a decision he had not expected to face. His friends were no longer still in the same way they had been before, their movements quieter, less certain, their earlier confidence replaced by something closer to awareness. The balance had changed, completely and irrevocably, not through force, not through confrontation, but through something far more unsettling. The realization that the person in front of them was not part of the script they understood, not someone who would respond the way they expected. Rachel did not move, did not press, did not escalate. She simply stood there, steady and composed, allowing the moment to settle into what it had become. And in that quiet, the choice was no longer hers to make. The decision hung in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time, as if the next second would define everything that followed. The man stood there, his posture no longer as certain as it had been when the night began, his confidence now fractured by something he could not fully explain. He glanced back at his friends, searching again for that silent reinforcement that had once come so easily. But this time he found hesitation instead. One of them shifted his weight and looked away, breaking eye contact, while the other let out a quiet breath, the kind that signaled something unspoken but understood. Rachel Monroe remained exactly where she was, her presence steady, grounded, untouched by the tension that had consumed the space just moments before. She did not press forward, did not demand an answer, did not raise her voice. She simply allowed the moment to exist, to unfold on its own terms, as if she had already seen how it would end. "Come on," one of the men behind him said quietly, his voice no longer carrying the same careless confidence. "This is not worth it." The words were simple, but they landed with a weight that shifted everything. The first man did not respond immediately. His jaw tightened again, his gaze flickering back to Rachel, searching for something that would justify staying, something that would restore the version of himself he had believed in just minutes ago. But it was not there. What stood in front of him now was not someone he could read, not someone he could predict, and that uncertainty pressed against him harder than any resistance ever could. Rachel's eyes remained calm, steady, unchanging, offering no challenge, no fear, no invitation, only the quiet certainty that the moment had already moved beyond him. The overhead light buzzed once more, casting a brief shadow across his face, and in that flicker, something shifted completely. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders releasing just enough to be noticed, and without another word, he took a small step back. It was not dramatic, not sudden, but it was unmistakable. The boundary had been redrawn, and he had chosen not to cross it. Behind him, his friends responded instantly, their bodies turning in subtle unison, their earlier stance dissolving into something quieter, something more aware. The invisible circle that had once surrounded Rachel was gone, replaced by open space that felt wider than before, as if the night itself had expanded around her. The man lingered for one more second, his eyes meeting hers again, but this time there was no challenge in them, no assumption, only the quiet realization that he had misjudged everything from the start. Then he turned, his steps slower than they had been when he first approached, and walked back toward the truck without another word. The others followed, their movements quick, almost eager to leave. The moment behind the sound of the truck door opening echoed briefly across the lot, followed by the low rumble of the engine coming to life. Headlights flicked on, cutting through the darkness for a moment before the vehicle pulled away, its presence fading into the distance until it became nothing more than another passing sound in the night. And then, just like that, it was over. The parking lot returned to its quiet state, the hum of the overhead lights steady once again, the distant road carrying on as if nothing had happened. Rachel stood there for a moment longer, her posture unchanged, her breathing even, as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a passing interruption. She reached for her grocery bag, lifting it from the hood of her car with the same calm care she had shown before, and opened the door without hesitation. There was no rush in her movements, no lingering tension, only the quiet certainty of someone who had never truly lost control of the moment. As she settled into the driver's seat and closed the door behind her, the world outside seemed to reset, the echoes of what had just occurred dissolving into the night. And in that stillness, one truth remained, unspoken but undeniable. Strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it simply stands still and lets the world reveal itself around it. The engine noise had long faded into the distance, but the quiet it left behind carried something different now, something deeper than before. Rachel Monroe sat still in the driver's seat, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, her gaze forward but unfocused for just a moment, as if allowing the night to settle completely around her. The parking lot, once charged with tension, had returned to its ordinary stillness, the overhead light casting a steady glow across the empty pavement, the distant road humming softly like a reminder that the world continued regardless of what had just happened. She exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from release, the kind that comes when a moment has fully passed and there is nothing left to resolve. Her reflection stared back at her faintly through the windshield, calm, composed, unchanged to anyone who might have looked from the outside. But beneath that stillness was something practiced, something earned over years that no one in that parking lot could have guessed. Her mind did not replay the encounter the way most would. Instead, it moved through it with quiet clarity, noting each detail without emotion. The way she had been trained to do, the distance between them, the shift in their posture, the exact moment their confidence began to fracture. It was not about victory, not about proving anything. It was simply awareness, the understanding that control is rarely about force and almost always about presence. Rachel reached for the ignition and turned the key, the car coming to life with a low, steady hum that blended seamlessly into the night. She adjusted the rearview mirror, her eyes briefly catching the empty space behind her where the truck had been just minutes ago, now nothing more than a memory already fading into the background. As she pulled out of the parking spot, her movements were smooth, unhurried, as if the entire encounter had been just another part of the evening, no more significant than the groceries resting beside her on the passenger seat. The road ahead stretched out under the glow of streetlights, each one passing overhead in a steady rhythm as she drove, the quiet of the night wrapping around her like a familiar presence. Her thoughts drifted, not to what had happened, but to something older, something deeper. The early mornings, the discipline, the repetition, the countless hours spent learning not just how to move, but how to remain still, how to observe, how to understand a situation before it ever needed to be confronted. Most people saw strength as something loud, something visible, something that demanded attention. But Rachel had learned long ago that real strength often existed in the opposite space, in silence, in patience, in the ability to stand without reacting until the moment revealed itself fully. A red light appeared ahead, and she slowed to a stop, the glow reflecting softly across her windshield. The intersection was empty, the city quiet at this hour, the world holding its breath in that brief pause between movement and stillness. She rested her hands lightly on the wheel again, her posture relaxed, her breathing even, her presence grounded in a way that required no effort. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly, then faded. Replaced once again by the quiet rhythm of the night. The light turned green, and she continued forward, her path clear, uninterrupted, as if nothing had ever stood in her way. And perhaps that was the truth of it. The moment in the parking lot had not changed her, had not shaken her, had not even surprised her. It had simply revealed something that had always been there, something that did not need to be proven or displayed to exist. As the city lights stretched out ahead of her, Rachel Monroe drove on, her presence steady, her world unchanged, leaving behind a moment that would linger far longer in the minds of those who had walked away than it ever would in hers. And in that quiet continuation, one thing remained certain: not all strength needs to be seen to be understood, and not all battles need to be fought to be won. Across town, the truck rolled through a dimly lit street, the earlier laughter gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavier with every passing block. The man who had stood closest to Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his eyes fixed ahead, but unfocused, replaying something he could not quite explain. The encounter had not ended the way he expected, not even close. There had been no argument, no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, and yet somehow it felt like he had lost control of the moment entirely. One of his friends shifted in the passenger seat, glancing over with a hesitant expression. "That was weird," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice carried none of the confidence it had earlier, only uncertainty. The driver exhaled slowly, shaking his head as if trying to dismiss the feeling. "She just stood there," he muttered, his tone quieter now, almost thoughtful, like nothing we said mattered. In the back seat, the third man leaned forward slightly, his brows furrowed. "Did you see the way she looked at you?" he asked. "That was not normal." The words lingered, unchallenged for the first time. None of them laughed. The truck continued down the road, passing under streetlights that flickered overhead, each one casting brief flashes of light across their faces, revealing expressions they were not used to wearing: doubt, reflection, something closer to awareness than any of them would admit. The driver tightened his grip again, then loosened it, the motion small but telling. "I have seen people get scared," he said slowly, as if working through the thought in real time. "I know what that looks like." That was not it. No one responded immediately, because there was nothing to argue against the memory of Rachel standing there, calm, unmoved, untouched by their presence, settled into the space between them like something permanent. It felt like. The passenger began, then hesitated, searching for the right words, like she already knew how it was going to end. The truck grew quieter still. The driver's jaw tightened again, but this time not from anger, from something else entirely. He slowed slightly at an intersection, the red light forcing them to stop, the glow reflecting across the windshield just long enough to hold them in place with their thoughts. "We should not do that again," the man in the back said quietly, his voice firm in a way that had not been there before. The driver did not argue. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, his eyes still forward. The light turned green, and the truck moved again, but something about the way they drove had changed. The speed, the posture, even the silence felt different, less careless, more aware. As they disappeared down the road, the moment they had left behind did not fade the way they expected. It stayed with them, not as a story to laugh about, but as something unresolved, something that challenged the way they saw themselves and the world around them. Meanwhile, miles away, Rachel Monroe turned onto a quiet residential street, her car gliding smoothly under the soft glow of porch lights and neatly spaced street lamps. The neighborhood was still, peaceful, the kind of place where everything felt predictable, safe, unchanged. She pulled into her driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a brief moment in the quiet that followed. Her reflection appeared again in the darkened windshield, calm, composed, exactly as she had been before she reached for her groceries, stepping out of the car with the same steady presence she carried everywhere. The night air was cool, the faint rustle of leaves in the distance the only sound. She walked toward her front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside without hesitation. The world behind her remained quiet, undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. And yet, somewhere out there, three men were driving through the night with a realization they could not shake, a silent lesson that would follow them far longer than they expected. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments are not the ones that explode into chaos, but the ones that unfold in complete silence, leaving behind a truth that cannot be ignored. Morning light slipped quietly through the curtains of Rachel Monroe's living room, soft and steady, the kind of light that made everything feel ordinary, unchanged, untouched by the night before. She moved through her home with the same calm rhythm she carried everywhere, placing her keys on the small wooden table by the door, setting her groceries on the kitchen counter, each motion deliberate, unhurried. As if nothing in her world had been disrupted, the coffee machine hummed softly. As it came to life, filling the silence with a familiar sound that grounded the moment in routine outside, the neighborhood stirred awake in small, predictable ways, a car door closing in the distance, a dog barking once before settling again, the quiet pulse of a new day beginning. Rachel poured her coffee and stood by the window for a moment, her gaze resting on the street beyond, her expression unchanged, thoughtful but not burdened. The events of the night before did not weigh on her the way they might have for someone else. They had already been processed, understood, and released. There was nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to revisit for her. It had simply been a moment, one of many, a situation that required awareness and then passed without leaving a mark. But somewhere else, that same moment had not ended so easily. The truck from the night before sat parked outside a small convenience store on the edge of town, its engine off, its presence still. The three men remained inside, not speaking, not moving much, each caught in their own thoughts as the early morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden. Their reflections showed in the glass storefront, not as confident figures leaning casually as they had the night before, but as something quieter, more uncertain. The driver finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I keep thinking about it," he admitted, his eyes fixed ahead. "About how she just stood there." No one laughed, no one dismissed it. The weight of that moment had settled into something real, something that challenged the version of themselves they had always relied on. It was like, one of them said slowly, choosing his words carefully, like none of it worked, not the way it usually does. The third man nodded slightly, his gaze distant. "Because she did not give us anything to work with," he replied, no fear, no reaction, nothing. The realization hung there, simple but undeniable. For the first time, they were not analyzing someone else, they were analyzing themselves. The driver leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly as the truth settled in. "Maybe that is the problem," he said quietly. "We expect people to react a certain way, and when they do not, we do not know what to do." The words lingered, not as a complaint, but as a realization that could not be ignored. Outside, a few early customers moved in and out of the store, their lives continuing as normal, unaware of the quiet shift happening inside that parked truck. Back at her home, Rachel set her coffee down and picked up her bag, preparing to leave for the day. Her movements remained steady, grounded, unchanged,